Hello, everyone. This is the Vice President of Internet Infidels, Edward Tahmizian. Y'all know me for my peer-reviewed scholarly paper on the origin of evil that was submitted a couple of years ago. And today, for the fourth time, I'm going to be interviewing the great and legendary Dr. Robert M. Price, who is one of the most famous mythicists in the world right now. And before we begin our questions, I'll let him add to his introduction and tell us about his upcoming activities, books, or anything else you'd like to talk about, and then we'll begin the questions. Take it away, Robert.
Well, I figured I'd like to discuss the ins and outs of Anselm's ontological argument. It's just kidding, of course. Uh, just in the way of shameless self promotion, I should mention that I have a book that is, I just proofed the galleys or whatever the heck it is for a book called The Gospels Behind the Gospels, and that's going to
Title.
come out, I think, Pitchstone, and I guess well, it might be before the new year. I'm working on another one called Houses of the Holy, a higher critical survey of world religions. And
Nice
that's
stuff.
really going to be atypical for this kind of book. And not only because of the terrible jokes in the footnotes. See, I'm still doing the Bible geek, although I wind up getting interviewed so often on History Valley and other things that with being in the depths of these books, I'm having a hard time doing the Bible geek as often as I used to. But I'm trying. I did one that's going to be put up soon, and I hope to get back to that. And I invite people to support me on Patreon, and I do every month or so a column or a story or one thing or another on there. And also on my website, robertmprice.mindvendor.com, I have a PayPal button. And I know it's disgusting, the shameless Jim Baker style pitching for cash, but got to keep the lights on. But a lot of good things going on, and I'm having a great time. So,
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah, it's funny because to tell you a quick story, Richard Carrier came into San Antonio and I actually invited him for lunch at this restaurant called Supper. It's in a five-star restaurant. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll be nice and I'll pay for him. And this guy was like getting like steak with like two glasses of like some expensive champagne. Just like screw you, Richard. Like our bill was like $120. Oh,
oh,
he's a shameless. He's like, the waitress like, hey, would you like an? I was like, oh, sure, I'll take this too. I was like, all right, whatever.
I guess
It
you just
happens.
took it literally.
Yeah, I took it literally. Yeah, yeah, that I'll take care of him. He went all the way with that, you know. Oh well, but it was one time and it was all right. And it was funny because afterwards, I knew that Jonathan Sheffield, his friend was in San Antonio. One of the people he knows in San Antonio, and we ended up meeting up, and he paid for my lunch. We went to a restaurant called Pesto. Yeah, so I was like, okay, that kind of compensates now for that expensive bill. Oh, so it all
Like
worked out in the end. Yeah. All
the
righty.
events.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. All righty. So, to begin our first question, so we have a verse in Matthew 27, verses, I think it's 8 through 10. Well, actually, we'll start through 7 through 10. And so I'll just read the New International Version. We'll talk about the issue with it. So it says, so they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 pieces of silver, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field as the Lord commanded. So the issue is that this seemingly was a misquote by the author of Matthew. I think he really meant to say from the prophet Zechariah, because in Zechariah chapter 11 chapter 11 verse 13, you have a reference to 30 pieces of silver, but you have nothing like that in Jeremiah. And I'll just read a quick exegetical account from John Calvin, and then after that, I'll let Dr. Robert and Price talk about whether the Christian rebuttals to there being a contradiction are valid or not. So John Calvin says, "How the name of Jeremiah crept in, I confess that I do not know, nor do I give much myself trouble to inquire. The passage itself plainly shows that the name of Jeremiah has been put down by mistake instead of Zechariah, from Zechariah 11:13. For in Jeremiah we find nothing of this sort, nor anything that even approaches to it." So, what do you have to say to that, Robert? So I guess I'll give you what the Christians say, and then you can tell me if this is valid or not. So what they'll say is either a copyist, when he was writing this down, since Jeremiah and Zechariah, the abbreviated form of those names looks similar, a copyist might have been confused about that, or they'll say that this is referring to a prophecy that was spoken by Jeremiah, not so that's why it's not inside of the book of Jeremiah, because it was spoken, and I guess by Jewish tradition or whatever, it was remembered, and that's what the author of Matthew is recounting. That's what they'll say. So what do you think of all this? You think it's valid at all?
Well, this second one seems to be desperate and arbitrary. I guess it's conceivable, but the first one, what Calvin says, that it's just a goof. He doesn't say whose goof it is. And Benjamin Warfield, a Calvinist apologist at the old Princeton Seminary. He was one of the great formulators of the doctrine of inerrancy, as fundamentalists hold it today. And he would say, I'm sure, that because in principle, he said, if you find something that appears to be an error or a contradiction, you just have to assume that it's a copyist error. We don't have the originals or anything close to them to check. So you can't prove it, but it's certainly not unnatural. And in fact, there is something kind of like it in Jeremiah. It's not that wording, but it has to do with some of the same subject matter. And it seems to me that the best explanation is that, and you do need an explanation, because Matthew was obviously, from the rest of the book, a very erudite scribe. So he could have made the mistake. Well, how would he? Easily, if he's thinking of the similarity to the passage I don't happen to have on the tip of my tongue from Jeremiah that's roughly like it. He probably, though he's quoting Zechariah, that's probably just screwing them up. And but it's an innocent mistake. It's just that fundamentalist inerrantists are stuck saying, "Ooh, that's a problem because God wouldn't have made a mistake." It's like when Jesus says about the mustard seed being the smallest seed on earth. Fundamentalists have a problem with that. They know it's trivial, but it doesn't affect the meaning. And some would say, well, he's not teaching biology. It's a parable.
It's like a
He's not
figure
teaching
of speech.
and he's saying, boy, it's so small, and yet, if you had faith the size of one, et cetera, et cetera. But they would say, wait a minute, Jesus can't have spoken in error. All right, it's an insignificant error, but if Jesus is infallible and Scripture is infallible, that doesn't cut it. So again, Warfield would say there must be some problem. And in the New International Version, like the two versions of this in the Gospels, and one of them just says smallest of all seeds, and the NIV translators translated the smallest of all your seeds. So, because if you look further, far and wide, you'll find that there are like orchid seeds and stuff that are even smaller. But it's like Jesus says, well, I know you wouldn't be familiar with them. So of all the seeds not being omniscient like me, you would, the comparison I'll make is to the mustard seed. And that's, they're saying your seed. Theoretically, it's possible because often, or not infrequently, in the Greek, you don't have possessive pronouns used when it would be natural to use them. So that isn't unfair, but it does seem arbitrary to me. And yet the inferred motivation, oh, it looks like these guys are just trying to harmonize the mistake. That really doesn't matter. Who cares why they're saying it? Is it reasonable? And it's not unreasonable. You can't prove it, but they're not saying you can. They just say that's their supposition. So this is the same sort of a thing. We know what he's talking about. There is such a Hebrew prophecy in the Bible. It doesn't matter if he gets the name wrong, as it seems like he did, but fundamentalists would feel more comfortable saying it was a later copyist's mistake, not Matthew's. That could be true, but
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Because, like, yeah, with the Jesus reference, it could be like more like a hyperbole. It's kind of like if, let's just assume volleyball existed back in Jesus's day, and Jesus was saying, like, Tiny Tim, being the smallest of all volleyball players, can hit past that post like, someone who's 6 feet tall. Like, it's like he's not saying that Tiny Tim's necessarily the smallest person who played volleyball. It's just like an exaggeration of like
Yeah.
how short he is and how well he can do despite his, physical limitation of being short. Like, it's not meant to be taken there. It's like the saying they're the mustard seed. So I guess you can kind of get around it there. But there is one that's like virtually unavoidable. Real quick, I'll just say, because in James, where it says God is not tempted, neither does he tempt other men, but each man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own sinful disposition. So it's saying like God doesn't experience sinful inclinations, nor does he create people with them. But I've proven beyond any and all doubt that he had to have created Adam with an inclination to sin, because without that, he can't be motivated to sin. So that's kind of might be a contradiction right there.
Yeah, that raises a similar question. If he didn't have an instinct to sin because he didn't know what sin was, which is kind of implied in the fact that he had not eaten of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
he even being condemned for?
Yeah,
There's
like
a problem.
yeah,
Um,
because the Christians will say like, okay, he means good and evil by experience. But like, here's the thing. So just to give you a quick analysis, so Christians will say, well, Adam didn't have a sinful desire. Like they'll say like the knowledge to secret or the idea of secret knowledge in and of itself wasn't bad, to be as wise as God. You could call that like a non-moral motivation, maybe like a metaphysically good inclination, like non-moral. They'll say, well, he just had that motivation to partake of secret knowledge. He didn't need a sinful disposition when he already had that motivation. But that doesn't work, because for moral agents, in order to do evil, you have to be inclined via a disposition to sin. And for good, you have to have a holy disposition. Because, like, think about it, in the Bible, Christ allegedly was someone who was physically able to sin, and he had non moral motivations too, like Adam, and he can't sin. You see, so because the Christians are saying he could have gone about that perfectly normal desire, like for secret knowledge without the sinful disposition. But like when Christ was tempted with like turning stones into bread, he had the motivation of extreme hunger, but he couldn't turn stones into bread. And the reason that is because though he knew eating food and turning stones into bread was good in and of itself, if he did that and ate, he'd be disobeying God and lying to God when he said that he would follow everything he told him, including going on like a 40-day fast without food. So that's just the thing. He's not motivated to lie or sin. That's why he can't do it. So the whole Adam just had a non-moral motivation doesn't work. You know what I mean? He would have specifically had to have a motivation to sin. And so the problem with that is like James 1:13 through 15, I think, says, yeah, God does not create sinful desires in people. He did. So I mean, and it's like even the Jews, and like I think it's like in the Mishnah, but it predates even that, where like they'll even admit they're like God created Adam in innocency with the Yetzer Hataf, the holy disposition, and the Yetzer Ra, which is the evil disposition. So oh well, there's kind of that one. So at least there's one right there.
And even the desire for the secret, the privileged knowledge of the gods. Augustine said, wait a minute, you don't know your place. You have no business with that, and you may be sorry once you found out. And of course, the great parable of that is Frankenstein, where he shouldn't have meddled in the affairs of God. At one point, when he says it's alive, he says, "Now I know how it feels to be God." There's your mistake, buddy. Or the guys that invented the atom bomb. Kind of wish you hadn't now. So maybe there's a reason for some of these things.
Yeah.
But even that would have been foolish to the point of culpability, I guess.
Yeah.
But
And I know, and there's like so many interesting things about Genesis. Like, God just said, "The day thou eateth of it, thou shalt surely die." He didn't say, "The day thou eateth of it, thou shalt be worthy of hell for eternity, no matter how sorry you are, and you'll need a savior, and I'm not obliged to give you that." Like, what if Adam didn't know they? What if Adam and Eve didn't know they'd be going to hell for eternity? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things we don't know about that account.
and that's nothing like that is even hinted in the story. He's condemned to death because he's not allowed to eat of the tree of life, which
Yeah.
would have kept it, which would have obviated
Yeah.
God
Forever.
from the need to replace him with a new caretaker for Eden. So it was all right if he ate the food of the gods to stay alive forever
Forever. Yeah.
for God's convenience. But he couldn't let him have that once he had the fruit of knowledge, because he'll be like one of us. God says, we don't want a new race of gods now that they can live if they can live forever and propagate, because that was the carnal knowledge you want to have. We got to put a stop to this, and it's so strange, the whole darn thing, and that's why I think the whole Christian approach to seeing it as sin and disobedience to God is a big mistake. I think the Gnostics were reading it literally when they said, look at this. God is telling them they will drop dead because it's poison. And then the woman finds out, oh, that's not true. We won't die. You mean, and it's not poison, it's good for food. The narrator says when she saw that
Yeah.
the
Three
tree
six.
was
Yeah.
good for food and desirable to make one wise, well, all right. And so that uh, God is lying to her because he doesn't want competition. And once he finds out that with the serpent's help they've outwitted him, he says, we got to get him the hell out of here.
Yeah.
And he can't undo it in any other way. And the Gnostic writer says, literally, what kind of a God is this? Is he not a malicious grudger? Yeah, that's right. And whoever wrote that story must have had that complaint about the dominant Hebrew God. There were several others, and he's sort of a given a finger to that whole approach.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks for that analysis, Robert. Alrighty, going into our second question. We're going to be talking about whether Dr. Robert M. Price thinks that the long ending of Mark was a part of what the author of Mark, whoever he was, originally wrote. And just to give some background, I'll just state where the short ending allegedly ends. I won't read all the long ending. It's basically about after the women go to the tomb, instead of just being scared and not telling anyone about anything because of the fright of the angel, Jesus later appears in front of the apostles and the women. That's basically what the long ending says. And then it's kind of similar to the ending of like Matthew, Luke, and John. So I'll just read where the short ending ends, and then I'll read some of the long ending, and I'll bring up some concerns with Dr. Robert M. Price as to why most, and including me, I don't think that it was a part of what Mark wrote. That the long ending was not a part of what he wrote. It just went to 16:8. So 16:8 says, Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. And that's after they talked to the angel, but there's no risen Jesus or anything. It's just an empty tomb. It's kind of an interesting ending. And then, so the long ending does have when Jesus appears in front of some people. And what I think is an interesting feature is when Jesus is reported as saying in Mark 16, verse 15, he said to them, this is Jesus talking, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name, they will drive out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands. And when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on sick people and they will live well. And so there's some interesting issues with this. First off, notice how, Robert, it doesn't say these are the signs of those who will be confirmed ministers of the word, like people who are prophets and apostles. Because prophets and apostles, like in the early church, had to do signs and wonders, to provide extraordinary evidence to extraordinary claims. Because anyone could just claim they're an apostle, like, and that God's been communicating with them. People are going to think they're crazy unless they can do signs. But it doesn't say these are the signs of those who will be prophets and apostles. It says these are the signs of those that will believe in the gospel. It's almost as if anyone who is a saved Christian and has a true faith will be able to do those signs. And like, it's just so weird. Like, it's very anti-Markian, like for him to say something like, and they shall pick up snakes in their hands. Like, that almost sounds like it's like that vocabulary, like, doesn't sound like it was from originally from the author of Mark. Because if you compare it to the rest of the text before 16:8, it's just out of place. It almost seems like someone else. And it's just like picking up, like, who would want to pick up snakes in their hand? Like, this is a little weird. And then yeah, so I'll just throw that out there and I'll have you comment. So do you think it's part of the original or not, and why?
I don't. It's for me. It's not so much the outrageous quality of these things, as if this were R.W. Shambach or somebody instead of Jesus. Because in Luke, he says something similar when the disciples come back from an evangelistic mission or whatever you'd call it. If they're excitedly telling Jesus how they did cast out demons and heal the sick, and Jesus says, "Look, I've given you power over the enemy. You'll be able to tread on snakes and scorpions." Uh, what does he mean? I mean, you can always say, "Oh, literally, the power of evil," but this is, you could take this literally, and that's what the ending of Mark, a long one, seems to do. Plus, in Acts, Paul does by accident pick up a viper.
Yeah.
And he's bitten by it and he shakes it off into the fire and they're waiting for him to keel over dead and he doesn't, and
Yeah.
which looks like the Mark and pseudepigraph is maybe even referring to that passage. But there's a huge problem with textual criticism because the earliest copies of Mark's gospel, as you say, ends at verse 8. They fled from the tomb, said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Well, now, why does it end there? Some have suggested that he did write more, but the manuscript was not cared for very well. Now, many scholars think that's true of John, which seems to have had the pages reshuffled because of odd discontinuities, though trivial ones in the narrative. Or Second Corinthians, which is a big mess. It looks like somebody has taken fragments of three, at least, Pauline letters. Gee, how does this go together? And he didn't do it very well, which is why it's screamingly obvious that this is not a unitary work. Something like that could have happened with Mark's gospel. It's not unlikely, but the thing is, the vocabulary also is not Markan. You can tell by, it sounds silly, but you can tell by characteristic word usage and things like that, that this is diction and vocabulary, that this is not the same writer. And the plus it directly contradicts verse 8. Did they say anything to anybody or did they not? Because
Yeah.
all three of the other gospels and these endings added on to Mark have to change Mark's ending. They don't just add what was missing, they
Mhm.
negate the ending because, oh, they did go and tell the disciples and got various reactions, and they're not even the same reactions from gospel to gospel. That shows that even that early, the other gospel writers didn't have a longer Mark than we do. And then there are slightly later copies that have like that longer ending with the snake handling and the so forth. And they appear later on. And it's obvious what happened there, that these copyists felt the same way that Matthew, Luke, and John did. Wait, this is no ending. There's no resurrection appearances. I'll try to make up the difference. And it's a different author, it's a different continuation. And the and the it's that one isn't the only substitute ending. There's a shorter ending, just a verse or two long, that
Oh
kind of
yeah,
sums it
the
up majorly.
other longer ending. Yeah,
That
yeah.
too. There's one where Jesus rebukes the disciples for not believing the women, and they start making excuses. It's really interesting. It's called the Freer-logion because this guy named Freer had the manuscript, the only manuscript that has that. And then there are some that have the longer and the shorter ending. It's obvious what happened. And so this cannot be, in my opinion, the original ending of Mark. And that's sort of significant because without it, you don't know. I mean, you can kind of infer that Mark believed that the disciples had a reunion with Jesus because the man at the tomb says, "Don't you remember how he told you to go to meet him in Galilee?" Which he did say at the Last Supper in Mark. But apparently, Mark is saying, well, I guess that didn't happen because they didn't give the message to the guys who would have gone. So we don't know what the heck happened. Charles Talbert, years ago, in a great book called What is a Gospel, pointed out that there are numerous ancient ascension or he used the word apotheosis stories of Empedocles, Apollonius, and a bunch of other of these guys, where they are Romulus is another one where they vanish and their followers are looking for them and cannot find so much as a bone or a scrap of clothing. Or Elijah, it's the same thing in the Bible, and so they finally figure he's been taken up, and sometimes a heavenly voice will reiterate that. Well, here you go. They go to the tomb of Jesus. Nobody's there but this guy who's sitting there waiting for him. And he says, well, you're seeking a living person where the dead would be. He's not here, he's risen. And so forth. That is so analogous to all these other instances that Talbert says any ancient reader would have automatically thought, oh, well, that's it. He ascended from the grave, and no resurrection appearances. Who the heck knows? So it's and that tells you one more thing, that the resurrection appearances you have in the other gospels have to be fiction because they all are, their gospels are following Mark up until that point, and then they go off in different directions, which they can only do by rejecting Mark's ending. What does that tell you? They have to have made
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah, there's so many ideas that came in my head. I think you're gonna find them interesting, but I'll just comment on this. Because you have to think whenever you're talking about what's the original or whether this was an add-in, like it's not enough to just go to like the majority of the manuscripts, like James White from Alpha and Omega Ministry says. Because think about it. If you're saying that originally there was the long ending, and then so a scribe would have had to have likely seen it and then taken it out. So what would be the motive for a scribe to just ignore the longer ending and be like, okay, there's all this extra evidence of the resurrection actually happening explicitly, why would they just take it out, you know? So you have to formulate hypotheses on that. I know like some people say like, okay, so like the longer ending was on like, you know, the scroll and maybe that got torn off. But like, yeah, when
That
you start to
could
think about
be.
like, yeah, when you start to
But
think
yeah,
about like how like someone just looking at it and taking it out, that would be weird.
that's really true because to do that would just contradict the instinct of all scribes if they're dealing with sacred text. You won't dare cut something out. If need be, you will correct it, quote unquote, by adding a contradictory verse so that the reader will be reading through and seeing something that seems kind of odd, but then he sees what the scribe is at and says, oh, well, I guess I was wrong about that. It didn't mean what I thought it did. And so they
Yeah,
could do corrections like that and did, but you wouldn't just hack out the stuff, or you wouldn't be copying it in the first place.
yeah.
You consider it sacred material.
Yeah, awesome. Very good statement. Yeah, and then like just to give a one last comment about the long ending, because it's like you know how I was mentioning that it just says these are the signs of those that will believe. Obviously, people took it as to mean that what it seems to imply that people, just regular Christians, will be able to do all those signs because you know you have the deal of like those millions of people that have died trying to handle snakes and you know drink a like a bucket of Drano and stuff like that because, like I said, yeah, it says believers, then it says signs of prophets and apostles,
It's
and then
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and then you have that deal, and then you have the deal of when Jesus says whoever believes and is baptized, there's the issue of you have to be baptized to be saved. There's a big deal with that. So there's a bunch of issues in there. All right, yeah. So yeah, thanks for giving us some insights into that. And then to finish up, I wanted to talk about instead of talking about First John 5:7, I think this will be more interesting. Um, it almost seems like an actual contradiction. You might find it a little silly, but when you think about it, it seems valid. So, at the ending of Luke, and even to the pre-Pauline Creed, you have Peter seeing Jesus first. It's
Mm-hmm.
clear. It's clear. So you have Jesus seeing Peter first, and then according to Luke, Peter relates to the apostles that he has seen the risen Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's even in Luke. It says Simon Peter has indeed seen the risen Lord. They believe his account. And then you have the two guys on the road to Aramaic. I forgot the name of the road. They had the two
Emmaus.
guys come Emmaus, yeah. They come and they say, "Oh, hey, that's awesome that Peter saw Christ. I now we don't just have to have blind faith in the women's account. Like I also saw Christ. I didn't know somehow I was directly looking at him and I didn't know it was him. And then when he started preaching, people are like, even Christians have to admit, like he put some spell on them so they couldn't discern who he was when they were looking right at him. That's a little weird. Anyway, so then okay, but then when he broke the bread and then disappeared there, we knew he was the Messiah. So they have three witnesses testifying that Jesus rose from the dead, and the apostles are clearly sure that he rose from the dead. They don't express concerns. And then you have Jesus appearing to them immediately, and they think they're seeing the Spirit. Like it's almost like as if they had not even heard that testimony. And people try to get around saying, well, they were Christians say, well, they were probably sure from the testimony, but like they didn't know with absolute certainty that he had risen from the dead because when he appeared, he kind of seemed like a spirit. He just appeared out of nothing. But then notice how it says, Robert, and it says Jesus rebuked them, as in seemingly implying Peter. He doesn't say all save for Peter, who had already seen him before. I mean, just think about this. Like he's going to know, even when Peter sees him alone, that he's going to have the same doubts as the other Judas died. So the other, I guess, 9 or 10 did when they saw him. They're going to think, oh, this is a spirit. They're going to maybe want to touch him and see him eat something. So, like, do you not think that when Jesus originally appeared in front of Peter, he would have known that Peter would have thought, because he probably would have appeared right in front of him. And then Peter's going to be like, hey, is this guy, a spirit? Is he dead or is he alive? And you would think Jesus would, with his psychic powers, would know, hey, this guy's going to want to touch me and see if I'm real or not. So it almost seems like this had already happened before. And that's why the apostles are so confident. They're not like, oh, I don't know, maybe he saw, maybe he didn't. They're certain. that he saw him because of his testimony. And then when Jesus is appearing in front of the apostles and Peter, it was as if Peter had not even had these experiences. He's never saying, "Oh, hey guys, I know this, like this happened to me before." He's not a spirit. And then like it even says like, and they still were not convinced. So then he, after touching him, so then he ate like a fish to prove that he could interact with matter. And then the apostles became convinced, seemingly implying that Peter's now convinced. Would have had stuff like that before. Like it almost seems like there's some kind of contradiction. Like the guy just forgot about Peter seeing him first. Like, what do you think about this?
Oh, well, it's just a kind of mosaic of disparate tiles. Somebody just strung together a bunch of different uh, anecdotes about the resurrection, fictive, distorted, who knows? But there's a bunch of that stuff. Like in John, the women go to the tomb, they don't see him, they leave. Mary Magdalene comes back. She sees the caretaker and says, "Oh, you might be able to help me. I apparently have gotten here too late, and they've reburied Jesus. Do you happen to know where?" Because it had said that they only put him in Joseph's tomb because the Sabbath was dawning and they had to do something with the body and come back later to finish it. And she figures, "I'm too late." And he says, "Mary." "What?" He turns around. "Oh my gosh, it's Jesus." Great story. Well, what does Jesus tell her? He says, "Hey, don't touch me. I've not yet ascended to my Father," which
Yeah,
sort of
that's
implies maybe she can't touch him because it's sort of like the angel Raphael in Tobit. He doesn't have a true physical body. But anyway, what does he tell Mary Magdalene to tell the other disciples? "Tell them goodbye for me." There's not going to be any appearances to the disciples, according to that little story. Whoever wrote that one didn't anticipate any further appearances. Now, we read of more in John because he's just tacked on various other ones. One is like another version of the Luke 24 story. "Hey, it's me, Thomas." But look at that story. That's two of them, because in the part that parallels Luke 24, the disciples are gathered behind closed doors. Jesus appears in front of them, and he shows them his hands and side, which is different than Luke, where it's hands and feet. But John has changed that because he has the spear piercing the side in his crucifixion account, so he's got to adjust that. And so they're convinced, and he breathes on them to receive the Holy Spirit so they can do their apostolic task. But then in the next episode, oh, what do you know? Thomas wasn't there. Did he not receive the Holy Spirit? Is he not equipped for apostleship? He was out picking up a pizza or something, and he comes back and says, "What? You've seen Jesus? Oh, come on." And Jesus appears again, the same routine. Obviously, the first part of it assumed all of them minus Judas were there, but they're trying to make a different point with doubting Thomas, because Thomas stands for the reader. "Don't you wish you could have been there when Jesus appeared to the 12? Well, blessed are you because you believe not seeing." He's just using Thomas to stand for the reader, but the reader's still screwed because he wasn't there when Thomas had his
yeah.
reader. And on it goes. Then suddenly in 21, the disciples have abandoned preaching and they've gone back to their old career as fishermen. This is obviously another first appearance story, because one of them sees Jesus on the story. "Oh my gosh, look at that. It's the Lord." And Peter says,
They haven't seen
jumps into the water, and then this thing. I, this is obviously, it presupposes they've in despair gone back to their old life, but now they're reinvigorated.
Yeah,
And
now it's like as if they seen him
first,
again. I mean, seen him first time, yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
just is a
It's
patchwork.
weird.
You
Yeah,
just
yeah.
cannot harmonize them.
Yeah, because it's like, was this allegedly when they were on the ship? Does the author is this like before the 40 days he spent with them as Acts mentions? Because that would be
Well, he
even more
doesn't even have
where
that
they
in
seem,
mind. There was
yeah.
no, and look at Luke and Acts. At the end of Luke, Jesus ascends on Easter Day. All the appearances are crammed into the one day. But in Acts, supposedly by the same author, as you say, Jesus hangs around for 40 days teaching them about the kingdom, which cannot be true anyway, because at the end of it, okay, you got any questions, guys? And they say, gee, Lord, is not the time you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Does he really mean to say they were that stupid? No,
After 40 days, now this is coming to my head to ask this. Yeah, like that just doesn't make sense.
and the whole point is just to give a blank check to the Christian bishops. Okay, you're going to say plenty of stuff, but there's no record of Jesus saying, you fill in the blank.
Yeah, I know. It's like I know it's all jarbled up. It just shows you that like those authors they didn't have everything in their head accurately. Because it's like the thing with Peter, it's like you really can't get around it. I think the only way you could get around it and say it's not a contradiction is to say when he originally appeared in front of Peter, he didn't give him all the proofs that he later gave the apostles. But it's like he just appeared in front of them. But it's like, but notice what Peter says. He's not saying, oh, he appeared in front of me. Maybe he rose from the dead, but maybe he's a spirit. Because I never touched him. I just saw him. He doesn't say anything like that. That's why the apostles are so confident saying he's seen the risen Lord. Like they're not having doubts either. So it's like virtually implied that Peter already did the touching and seeing and what fish eating with Jesus or whatever before when he saw him. And then like I said, when Peter sees him again with Jesus and with the other guys, it's as if he's never seen him. It just doesn't make any. It's as if he's the one who's desperately looking for all the proofs, as if he never saw him. It's just weird. And then I think in is it Acts where Peter says it's either in the God, I think it's in Acts where Peter says, no one has seen the risen Lord except for those who ate and drank with them. Well, what
Mhm.
about the 500 that Paul mentions?
That has
Did
to be an
500 guys just eat
interpolation.
and drink with them or what?
Yeah, that has to be an interpolation of a story we also find preserved in one version of the Gospel of Nicodemus, where we find out who the 500 were. And this is really fun. The 500 were the troops that Pilate posted at the tomb. And they, of course, didn't really know what happened because they were blown away by the appearance of the angel. Okay, so Pilate sends them to Galilee, where appearances of Jesus have been reported. Go check this out. And they do, and they get there just in time to see Jesus ascend into heaven from Galilee. They are the 500 brethren because they're now convinced about Jesus, and they go back to Pilate and report this. Well, for my money, that's what that refers to in 1 Corinthians 15, and it's an interpolation into an interpolation. Like if this had been part of
Wow.
the tradition, where first he appeared to Cephas, and then to the 12, and then to James, and all the apostles, if this had been early enough to be in that company, wouldn't it have found a place in at least one of the Gospels? I mean, if it was known that Jesus had appeared to 500 people at
500.
once, it's not going to show up in any gospel. Well, it didn't show up in 1 Corinthians 15 either until some copyist added it. And it's the extravagance of it. I don't know. It's just this one contradiction after another. One interesting thing: why is not any first appearance to Peter given? Well, it could be hiding in plain sight. Interestingly, some have suggested, and I kind of think this is correct, that the transfiguration was originally a resurrection appearance because it's just Jesus in this redeemed body, the shining garments. That's a traditional Jewish image for the resurrection body of the righteous. And in Matthew, his face is shining too, but it's already that in Mark. and Peter is there, and so are James and John, but Peter's the only one with a big mouth who speaks and embarrasses himself. And according to this theory, originally it wasn't just Elijah and Moses who disappeared into the glory cloud. Jesus disappeared too, because in Luke he disappears into a cloud, right? And so that this would have been and the heavenly voice says, "This is my son, listen to him." That would fit perfectly as the appearance to Peter. But here's another possibility. Suppose Peter is who are the two disciples on the road to Emmaus? One is unnamed, the other is said to be Cleopas. Well, that could be another version of Cephas, another name for Peter. And so when they see who they were talking to and run back to Jerusalem, there might have been some textual funny business, and it might originally have read that when they say, "We have seen the Lord, he has appeared to Peter," rather than the disciples saying, "Oh, yeah, we already know that because he's appeared to Peter." It would make more sense to me. And of course, we don't have manuscripts to say this, they're all lost that early, that originally Peter was one of the two guys, and he was the one saying, "We have seen the Lord." That could have
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the other guy saying, "We have seen the Lord," me and this guy, and that was Peter, and that's okay.
who
Interesting.
knows? It's speculative,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
admit.
yeah, what the original, but yeah, because yeah, in Luke it says the apostles were saying Simon Peter has seen the risen Lord. Yeah, yeah, we don't have any originals, unfortunately. But it's just the resurrection appearances are just so weird because it's like when Jesus was about to ascend out, and it says when many saw him, some believed, but some doubted. That's what it
Actually,
actually
it
said.
doesn't say that in Greek. They're trying to
Oh,
make
but
it sound better. It says they worshiped him, but they doubted.
doubted.
Same people. And I think that's just a clumsy way of trying to say, as these longer narratives say, they doubted at first, but once he proved it was he, they worshiped him. I have a hunch it's just clumsily trying to sum that up fast, but it doesn't say
Yeah,
some doubted, it says they doubted.
yeah. Who knows? Right now, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. All righty, and I guess going in for our last question. So I was interviewing, as you well know, Dr. Dennis R. McDonald and
Ah.
Dr. Robin Faith Walsh for the first time in history. It was so nice, and beat Derek Lambert to it. So glad. I actually sent him I usually send him messages and he doesn't say anything, but when I sent him this, he was like, "Great catch, my friend. You're really doing good." I'm like, "All right, that sounds good."
Hey, yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
that's
Mm-hmm.
not bad. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and so it was kind of like a lot of first times, so to speak, for Robin Faith Walsh, because this was the first time her and Dennis were talking about mimetic criticism and like their opposing views and similar views between Dennis and Robin, because they're like, "Oh, I study under so and so, blah 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 blah," and they got caught up with each other. And I after they talked a little bit about like the Q source hypothesis and like mimetic devices allegedly in the Gospels. I asked her to give her first official position on mythicism, since like no one seems to know exactly what she thinks. Like Crossan didn't know, no one knows. Like she was kind of like in this like mystery box. Like she is mythicist, historicist. I was like, so please tell us whether you think the mythicist view is plausible or not. She said that she doesn't think it's plausible. She's a historicist, and she said that her main reasoning for believing that an actual Jesus lived was because critics like mythicists have to work too much around what Paul says about his trips to Jerusalem to visit the apostles. I guess she's saying like when she's talking with the apostles, it seems like the main point of the gospel message had to be that he crucified, died, and was buried like on earth. I'm thinking that's what she's thinking. So what would you have to say about that issue with Paul? And like how would you give a rebuttal to her?
Well, I suspect she's thinking of Galatians in the passage where Paul or whoever wrote it is saying that I didn't meet then on that occasion with any apostles except for Cephas and James, the brother of the Lord. And
Yeah.
they say, well, brother of the Lord. I mean, if James was a historical figure, unless Jesus was an imaginary playmate like Exodore and his followers on the old Mork and Mindy show. I love that character. Uh, like Exodore was this paranoid schizophrenic saying the Venusians are going to invade by Labor Day, and he's wearing this robe, and then nobody's around him, and he turns and says, "Stop tickling me." I loved it. It was great. Anyway, was that what James was? Oh, what'd you say? Jesus like Harvey, the invisible 6-foot rabbit in the Jimmy Stewart movie? Uh, so it's natural to take it that way, but I just think they're too cursory about that because there is at least one other obvious denotation for the brother of the Lord. For one thing, he
Mm-hmm.
does
Oh
say brother of the Lord Jesus, brother of the Lord. That may be like Paul saying in First Corinthians that he and Apollos are fellow workers with God. Do they mean God has the office cubicle next to theirs? No, they're working with God. Well, there we know that similarly there was a group of traveling prophets, evangelists, whatever, who are mentioned in Third John, where it says it's a good thing to support the brethren. They've gone out to preach in the name without any resources. The brethren, well, he means a specific group. And similarly, in Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats scenario, where he says, "You saw me and you didn't lift a finger to help me." He said, "What? Some mistake? We never saw you like this." I'm sure you did. Inasmuch as you did this to the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. Who does he mean? The poor in general? I'm afraid not. Christians in general? No. In terms of Matthew's context, he has to mean the traveling missionaries because the mission charge, where he sends them out without a purse or staff or money belt and so forth, and he says they'll take care of your needs, and if they don't, to hell with them, shake the dust off your feet. Well, that's what he's talking about. This
yeah.
is the scene where that catches up with the people. Say, get out of here with your fanaticism. Okay, but know this, the kingdom of God has come near. That's what he's talking about. The brethren are a group of itinerant evangelists. And who is James, according to Jewish Christian lore? Like the Pseudo Clementines or the Gospel of Thomas. We know that you're going to leave us, Jesus. Then who will be great among us? And he says, James, on whose behalf heaven and earth were created. Wherever
Mm-hmm.
you come from, go to James. What does that mean? Well, in the Pseudo Clementine material, James is the head of this missionary board. Everybody, including Peter, had to come back to him and report. That's what it has to mean. And so it's very likely that James, the brother of the Lord, is the head of the brethren of the Lord, metaphorically. So you just cannot take one possible meaning of one phrase in one place in the New Testament and say, oh, yeah, that proves it. There was a historical Jesus. You gotta be kidding.
Gotcha. Yeah, and like so you will know about the whole feud that started when Dennis McDonald started bashing on Carrier because of his unacademic position of mythicism. What did he say to me? He said it was he was like a hobo being desperate, going into the basket, trying to salvage anything he can. And of course, like it was just like this back and forth, like they were like rebuttaling each other. And then Carrier made that post about me, Dennis McDonald. He went after Dennis, and then he kind of went after me against like the seed of David reference. And then like
Oh,
he was like, yeah, I mean, there's just so much to this, and he even has like a whole blog post just like it was like 5 pages long, just dedicated to the seed of David reference and stuff like that. So that's just
that's
there's just so much into
crazy
this. Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
There's a heavenly sperm bank, and David was a donor. Uh, what on earth? But he's got to get out of Romans 1:3 through 4 because he holds the pre-critical view that all the epistles are written by Paul, at least the big seven, or this thing that the ascension of Isaiah speaks of a celestial crucifixion of Jesus. I have looked through that again and again. He must have a different translation than I do. I don't know where he finds that. Uh, I mean, he's a
John McDonald.
brilliant guy, but these are serious errors, in my opinion.
Wow, even a myth is going on. But like I kind of agree with you because it's like I was talking to John McDonald. He has he's a library author. He's got an excellent piece criticizing the penal substitutionary atonement model, and he was telling me like, I think you're right about the seed of David reference, and like Dennis R. McDonald brought up a good point. It's not that Paul couldn't have meant what you said about the cosmic sperm bank and all that, and I know making a physical, giving the astral Jesus a physical nature. It's not that Paul couldn't have meant that, but the thing is, how do you think Paul would think that the readers of his work would have interpreted his references? That's where the killer is, because no first century Jews or even a Gentile is gonna be reading that letter of Paul and think what Carrier's saying. Oh, it means the cosmic sperm bank stuff. They're gonna think he came from like an actual physical descendant of David.
Yeah, that's just like the thing. Well, it's not really the smallest of all seeds on earth, but only much worse. That is desperation. What he ought to say is, if he believes it, is that this is an interpolation, which would make sense since it doesn't really fit his pre-existence Christology elsewhere in the so-called Pauline writings, and it's in meter and verse. Usually, when you find that stuff, it implies it's a creed or a hymn that is being quoted. And so it could be that it's interpolated into the prose, or that Paul is quoting a hymn that glorifies Jesus, but isn't precisely matched with his Christology, partly because the Jews in the congregation may be adoptionists. He says the church is Jews and Gentiles, and he's trying to get support from them. I'm going to go on to Spain next. I need your help. He's fundraising. And so let's get straight what I actually teach, so you
Yeah.
don't get embarrassed. Well, he might be doing a bow in that direction, but that's much more likely than this crazy thing.
Yeah. And I want to just announce it to at least Carrier yaps on me because he's pretty. When people say the slightest thing to offend him, he just goes at him. I want to tell everyone watching this that I know that Carrier acknowledges that the seed of David reference is pro-historicity, not anti-historicity. He just thinks even though it's pro-historicity for the seed, as insofar as the seed of David reference, he still thinks it's not conclusive enough to say like this means beyond any reasonable doubt that there was a historical Jesus. He still thinks there's ways to get out of it, with his mythicist view. But even then, like, I think like he needs to think about that. Like when Paul wrote this or whatever, like how did the Jews understand what he was saying? Do they think they're in their wildest imaginations they're gonna come up? I mean, there were no Christ myth theorists back in Paul's day. Oh, well, who's gonna come up with all that stuff when they're reading? So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, thank you again, Dr. Robert M. Price. I think this is our fourth interview. We've had a lot of good conversations. And just to close off, I'm going to kind of help you out here. Ladies and gentlemen, please make donations to him. I'm on his Patreon, Robert M. Price website. This is on Mindvendor, and he has a couple of tiers. They're various prices. They're real interesting. I'll just name off the names of them and maybe show you some ones that I really like. So you've got the Initiate, the Acolyte, Mystagogy, Stagogy,
Mr. God.
Mystagogy, gotcha. Hierophant, Heavy Search. I think that's a picture of Thoth Hermes Trismegistus, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that. I got that from Manly Palmer Hall and Magus. Luminatus, and Ipsissimus. And for the Ipsissimus one, that's $250 per month. And you get the benefit of all previous rewards. And just to summarize, it's just he will acknowledge your name in his next book. He'll dedicate an episode of the Bible Geek to you, where you can he addresses a lot of questions, and then he'll address yours as well. And you get all previous awards from the other tiers. Plus, you get to join Robert and Price and wife Carl for a VIP dinner with drinks and restaurant of your choice in Raleigh, where he's stationed. So yeah, you guys get to have dinner with the legend and his wife and themselves, and you get to talk about whatever you like. So please make donations. You get to have the conversations that I'm having over some nice. Is it any restaurant in your area, or just
well,
your
yeah.
favorite?
Well, of course, I'm a pizza junkie. I wouldn't impose that on him, but there are some nice steakhouses and stuff.
Awesome. Sounds good. And you get to have some tasty steak as well. All righty. And on just one quick comment. So the Order of Rosencrantz, like the actual official order, is actually around. I looked it up online. So there's a couple of like offshot organizations, but I don't think they're authentic. But there's actually like an order around. They're like the Freemasons, and they're called the Order of the Rose. And and like it actually is like a mystery school temple, like the Freemasons, where you have to make like your application and stuff like that, and they have to like search you out to see if you meet the qualifications. And I think it's like they have like online classes about spirituality, and it was very interesting. One of the head I don't know, I guess he's just one of the head supporters, and he also talks about like philosophy and stuff like that, and he was giving an introduction to the organization. And it was interesting because Manly Palmer Hall, who I told you about, that mystic who wrote the Secret Teaching of All Ages, that he mentions he mentions the Order of the Rosencrantz, and he says there was like stories about like, so they would have like the secret members, and the secret members had like the power to teleport from different parallel dimensions and go like back and forth and get like secret knowledge from people, and they would share it with like others. And then you had like the overt people on like the front end that didn't have all the secret privileges as the other guys, but they were able to be like, allegedly how like Pythagoras was, they were able to like bring out like the best power of like natural principles to heal like things like cancer and stuff like that. Things thought to be impossible, they could do them because of their understanding of like nature and stuff like that. It was real interesting. So I was like thinking, like jokingly, if I ever actually sent this guy an interview request, he hasn't gotten back to me, but like I could just so it's like, so in your organization, is it still true? Mary Palmer Home mentioned that you had secret members. I could go in and out of dimensions. It's not attainable in your organization, because that's going to be the deal sealer whether I sign with you or not,
Well, Deepak Chopra claims to have walked through walls, unless he means he went through the door, which I doubt. I regard this guy as a charlatan. I mean, I don't want to commit the genetic fallacy. He's learned from various people. He may have some good stuff to say, but he strikes me as a con man. But he's
Deepak
Deepak Chopra.
Deepak Chopra, oh yeah, he's popular. Yeah, I remember when Dawkins interviewed him. He was like, "So Dawkins was like, so you say things about like your principles having to do with quantum mechanics." Like he was like, oh, he gave an explanation. He's like, "So what's this exactly have to do with quantum mechanics?" And he's like, "Well, it deals with energy, so it's kind of
Oh, I wish
like,
I'd have heard
no, come on."
that.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, it's just a stretch. Oh well. All righty. Well, thank you again, Dr. Robert and Price. This was a fabulous interview. And yeah, be sure to check out his website and make donations, and check out Internet Infidels, and subscribe to my channel, and you can check out all of our free thought information. And in a couple of minutes, I'll have this link available for you, Dr. Robert and Price.
wow.
And then yeah, if you can share it and tell everyone about the good news of secularism.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. All righty. Thank you again, sir. Peace.
Thank you.